Hey, what's going on, guys? Justin Melson here. I create all the content on the Happy Fox Productions YouTube channel. And today we're going to be going over everything you need to know on how to achieve cinematic color correction for your music videos, your short films, your feature films, etc. Essentially what this video is going to be is I'm going to try and teach you guys everything I wish I knew going into color correction, or all the different knowledge that is on the internet. I'm going to try my best to put it into one video, so it's just all in one spot that you can soak in. Now I will say this is a longer video. I'm going to be going over everything from screen calibration to coloring boards. We have the tangent element and the tangent ripple, all the way down to using DaVinci Resolve, Adobe Speed Grade. And I'll also be teaching how to read your scopes. So this is going to be a long video, and if you don't want to sit through the entire thing, we do have a page so you can go and browse and see which section you want to learn about. But, you know, you're here to learn. Watch the whole video. Learn some knowledge you might not know, or just have all the knowledge you already know repeated to you. I'm just going to teach you guys what I know, and I hope you guys enjoy this video. So first, let's go ahead and jump into screen calibration. But before we do that, I just want to say I'm not going to be going over, the one thing I'm not going to be going over is color psychology and the way it impacts your productions. And the reason being is because I already have done a full video on that, which you can watch. The note is in the description below, or you can watch somewhere in this area. I keep hitting the mic. I have a full video on how to go over how color psychology impacts your productions. And I do have a presentation that I did with Adobe, which you can also watch here, or link in the description, that goes over color psychology and how to use their products and all that. That's the one thing we won't be going over in this tutorial. But anyways, on to the things that we will be talking about. So what I have here is the Spyder 5 Lite. Now this is my color calibration tool of choice. The reason being is because you need to color calibrate your monitors on a weekly to monthly to yearly basis. Surprisingly, a lot of designers and a lot of artists and students that I've talked to don't calibrate their monitors. And I feel like it's one of those things that's just kind of overlooked pretty often. The reason it's so important is because when you're dealing with color, you need to make sure that the color you're dealing with is accurate. And you wouldn't want to calibrate an entire feature film on a monitor that's not calibrated. And then when they display it in the movie theater, the blacks aren't rich. They're kind of foggy or misty, and they're kind of gray. And you're like, I didn't grade it like that. Or you find inconsistencies in your grade. A lot of the times people think, well, it came from the factory, you know, it's an Asus or Acer, and it came from the factory and I didn't touch anything, which is great. But factory settings or the default settings aren't optimized for professional photography or videography or coloring artists. And it helps because, you know, when you're dealing with photography, you have to convert your RGB color space to a YMCK color space so you can now print. And for those of you guys who don't know, a quick lesson on that, RGB stands for red, green, blue. When you're dealing with anything digital in terms of the web or digital video, you're dealing with the red, green, and blue color space, which is an additive color space. You add colors together, which will eventually get you white. You know, you add blue, you add red, you add green, and eventually when you add them together, you're going to get pure white. But when you're dealing with YMCK, that is a subtractive color space. So you're adding these colors, which will eventually get you to an ink of black, which is what deals with printing and printers. And there's a whole process that deals with printing professionally, which I'm not going to go into, which I don't have enough knowledge to talk about that. I'm not a photographer or printer, but that's essentially how that works. So it's always good to play it safe, always good to be efficient and professional. Have professional color calibrated monitors. And the thing is with the Spyder Lite is it measures your actual room temperature. So for example, and this is something I like to do, is I like to have all the color temperature in my room the same color. I don't like to have daylight balance bulbs and tungsten bulbs, or I don't like to have daylight hitting my screen and tungsten. The reason being is because your eyes, for one, have to white balance for one or the other, just like a camera. If you're in a room with tungsten bulbs, your eyes are going to eventually adjust to those tungsten bulbs to be white. Same when you're outside in daylight, you're 5600 degrees Kelvin, your eyes are going to eventually white balance for that to be white. But if you have a mix of color temperature, it's going to be harder for your eyes to adjust. So I like to have the same color temperature bulbs in my room. If I'm going to have the window open, I'm going to shut off all my tungsten bulbs. And if I'm going to have my bulbs on, I'm going to have my window closed. But ultimately, I like to have no light. I like to grade my film or my music videos or whatever you're grading and pitch darkness. When a lot of times when people color their films and you watch the behind the scenes, whether it's like Company 3 or Technicolor, professional post-production houses, they're coloring in the dark. And that is because it's good to look at your film the way it's going to be displayed. And a lot of the times feature films are watched in a movie theater in the dark. So it's always good to color your films in a dark setting, in my opinion. Your eyes are going to see what the audience is going to see, and I feel it gives you a much more accurate result. And that is why it is always good to color calibrate your monitors, because you don't want to do all that work coloring something just to find out it's not going to look the way you wanted. And I have a story on that, and it's not fun at all. Make sure to color calibrate your monitors, guys. Alright, so the next thing I want to talk to you guys about are color grading panels. So what we have here is the tangent element TK and the tangent ripple. Now this guy I actually own. This is my own tangent element, and then Tangent loaned me this ripple for the video. And this isn't sponsored by Tangent. They're not telling me what to say. Everything I'm going to say is my own opinion. So first off, this is about $1,200, a little bit less than $1,200, and this one is about $350. Now that's a huge difference. This is 3 times the price of this. And they do the same thing in a sense. You have your 3-way color correction, you can bypass, you can cancel, and the same thing with this. You have your 3-way color correction, your tracker balls, you can control the luminance, and you can bypass your effects. But in terms of design, which this isn't a video going over comparing the two, but in design you could definitely see how this one, material-wise, is built better. It's engineered a bit better. They were able to put more work into it, which is why the price tag is so high. And just ergonomically, when you're working, you work much more efficiently than you do with the Tangent. But the Tangent is still a really good coloring board, in my opinion. It kind of feels like a Sega Genesis controller. I don't know if any of you guys know what a Sega Genesis is. Well, you guys know what a Sega Genesis is. It feels like a Sega Genesis controller in a sense because it's more plasticky compared to the Element. But this, when I was talking to Chris at Tangent at NAB, he was saying, this is more for the DIT or the film school student, people that might not be able to afford the full coloring board, the $1,200 or the $3,500 coloring board. You can still get the Tangent Ripple for $350, and it's doing the exact same thing as this, but of course, engineering wise, it is engineered differently. Ergonomically, it's plasticky, the buttons are kind of more stingier, the rings on the side, they aren't on the side anymore, they're on top. But it does the same thing. So I personally feel like if you're looking for a color grading panel, I highly recommend the Tangent Ripple. But if you do plan on doing this professionally or making a living or making money basically off of your color grading skills, then I would recommend the Tangent Element, because in the long run, efficiently, you're going to be doing much better ergonomically the way the board is set out, in my opinion. Now, the reason you would want a color grading board in general is, one, like I mentioned, efficiency. You no longer have to click around. When you're doing it for so long, you start to think it's normal. Like for me, for example, I always clicked when I did my color grading. I'd click and drag, blah, 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 whatever. But then I started to realize, once I got this color grading board, clicking and dragging wasted a lot of time. It doesn't feel like it, but every second and every minute counts. For example, at the moment I'm coloring a feature film, and when you're trying to knock out 200 to 400 shots a day, this is really efficient because you could just do your shadows real quick, do your highlights, add some contrast, go into your midtones, add a little bit of warmth into your midtones, and then you're set. But with your mouse, you're finessing, you're doing so much, you're clicking everywhere, and it's nowhere near the efficiency as this. For example, if you want to add contrast with your mouse, you have to either go to the contrast slider and move it over, or you need to go into your shadows and drop the shadows, and you need to go into your highlights and raise the highlights. Whereas with your Tangent panel, you can just easily just lower the blacks, up the whites, and then you have some contrast, which this is obviously really extreme, but you guys get what I'm saying. It's much more efficient, and the precision is much better, especially when you're dealing with work that's going to be seen by producers, or there's funding put into it. It's going to be put in the movie theater. You want to make sure your work is good, and the precision value is that even a word? Precision value? I don't know. The Ripple, what makes it good for film students are not only the price point, but the fact that you could just put it in your backpack and you can just go. You could put it into your laptop. You could plug it into your computer lab. You could just take this guy where you need to go and do some coloring on the go. That is how efficient and small it is. It's good enough, like I said, a DIT, a digital imaging technician, can go in on set and not only do all the data encryption and backup that they need to do. If the DP is like, hey, we need a small grade, or we just need to look at the dailies and just do a quick grade so the director can see what we're dealing with, you can just do a quick grade on set with the tangent ripple. So even though it is made, in my opinion, for people with a smaller price point, like, hey, you don't want to spend a lot of money on this, almost anyone, even in Hollywood productions, can use this. That's how good these products are, in my opinion. Again, I don't want to overhype up these tangent panels, but I really enjoy using them, and they really up my workflow a lot. So I highly recommend them, and I hope you guys check them out. If you guys do want to purchase them, there is a link in the description below, so go ham if you want. I'm not going to make you, but I do recommend it though. Buy it. Alright, you guys have made it this far. Congratulations. Now welcome to the section of the video where you learn how to read scopes. This is my personal favorite part because, you know, when you have a client next to you or you have someone right next to you, they're like, what does all this stuff mean? And I'm like, you need to be smart to know this stuff. Even though I'm colorblind, I still feel smart whenever I'm fiddling stuff and I'm reading it. I'm like a doctor, but for video. But anyways, so basically what we're going to be going over is how to read this. What do all these numbers mean? What is this? What is this? And what is this? So the first thing I'm going to go off with stating are what these three scopes are. So this is a vector scope. This is your RGB parade, and this is your waveform. Now the easiest way to tell the difference between the two is your RGB parade is pretty intuitive. So this is your reds, your greens, and your blues, and this is your parade scope. So RGB parade. Your waveform, you have your mix of colors, your reds and your greens and your blues, and they're not separated like in your RGB parade, they're combined. So when you, let's say, extract a certain color or you add more of a certain color, you'll kind of see it come up more. So if I add more blue, you'll definitely see the blues come up, and this will turn more of like a reddish green because we kept the greens in there but the blues have been lifted. Or we could add that and then it brings it back. So it's all kind of lifting and pulling and extracting and putting in colors, which is the way it all works. So this is your vector scope. Now the best way to use your vector scope, in my opinion, is to see where your skin tones are and to see where all the different colors are in your shot. Now this does a great job of telling you, but this doesn't actually tell you if your skin tones are accurate. Neither does your RGB parade. Now I use the vector scope to make sure my skin tones are accurate. So for example, if I'm doing a shot that is very, very warm, let's do a shot that's very cold, for example, but we don't want the skin tones to be blue and pink. We put too much time on set with the makeup artist to do that. So when I'm keying skin tones, I like to make sure that it rides right near this line. So that's in between yellow and red, which is a bit of an orange color. Now it doesn't matter what ethnicity you are, if you're Caucasian, African American, Japanese, it doesn't matter. This human skin tone line, or flesh tone I should say, is always going to be in this area. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, or whatever your ethnicity is, it's always going to be in this area. So for example, when I'm grading a shot and I have a lot of cyans and magentas and it's all over the place, I like to make sure my skin tones are somewhat in this area. It doesn't have to be perfect because if your shot is cooler, it might not be exactly red, but that is the best way to grade your shot. So I'll use my RGB parade, then I'll use my waveform to kind of check my exposure, my IRE values, and then I'll come here and see where my skin tones are, see where my shot lies. If your shot is heavily blue, you'll see a lot of blue. But that is essentially the way I like to read my scopes and what they do. So on the left side, you see 0 to 100, 0 to 100, and then we see yellow, red, magenta, blue, cyan, indigo, green. So what this all means is essentially the way you read your video is from left to right. So what we have here is a log shot on the Blackmagic Cinema camera. It is very flat. It's logarithmic. It's not converted to Rec 709 or anything. So it's very flat, very unsaturated, and not many colors. And the reason I chose this shot is because there's a huge contrast difference, which I feel like will be able to help you guys. So we have the sun beaming on the bottom right side of the image, and then it's darker on the left side of the image. And the best way for you guys to see that is, remember I said we read from left to right. So you can see it is flat, and then we have our RE values go up. That's because on this side of the image, it's brighter. The luminance values are brighter. So then we can see that right here, and right here, but we cannot necessarily see that on our vector scope because that's not what it's made for. So what exactly do these numbers mean? These are IRE values. Now 10 IRE means it's very dark, 20 IRE, 30, and then the brighter you go, the lighter it is. And especially when you get into broadcast work, this is very important, especially when you start crossing legal color space and boundaries, such as like 7.5 IRE for black and 100 IRE for pure white. But the main reason I like to use this is where my skin tones are. For example, when I'm exposing a shot on set, I like to make sure my skin tones are around the 40 to 60 IRE marker. So by the time I come into post, such as DaVinci or Premiere Pro or SpeedGrade, my skin tones are already in a decent spot, because your skin tones are typically always in your midtones, which is the middle part of your scope. So for example, if I move my midtones right here, it's kind of moving the entire graph, because this entire shot is kind of in the midtones. It's not too bright and it's not too dark. What we have on the right side is 0 to 255, and there's 255 shades of red, green, and blue in each channel, such as 255 shades of red, 255 shades of blue, and 255 shades of green when you're dealing in an 8-bit color space. Now in SpeedGrade or DaVinci Resolve, you could click this and say, I want to work in a 16-bit or a 32-bit. So for example, when you change it to 10-bit, which I can't necessarily do here, it'll go up to 1024 shades, I believe. Since we're working in 8-bit, this is Blackmagic 10-bit footage, where we're going to be working on an 8-bit composition or an 8-bit color, an 8-bit sequence. So the best way to do this is I'm just going to perform a simple grade so you guys can see exactly how, when I manipulate the image, what it's doing to our scopes. So again, this shot is darker on the left side and brighter on the right side. So it's darker here and then it gets brighter here. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is go into my curves, which, by the way, your curves, in my opinion, is the best tool for color correction, hands down. You could almost do anything within the curves. It's an infinite amount of possibility. You have your highlight, your whites, your highlights, your midtones / gamma, your shadows, and your blacks. So you have all of that range inside of your luminance, and then within that, you have that within your reds and your greens and your blues. So there's an infinite amount of possibilities. You can change the exposure of your shot, the color of your shot, all within your curves editor, which is great. So I'm just going to start off with my curves. And then as I can see on my scope, this shot doesn't have a lot of contrast. It's just all squished, but it's all squished in between the middle. So what I'm going to do is go into my highlights, bump it up just a bit. And you see, as we do that, I'm also bringing up my midtones and my shadows, which brought up the entire shot in general. So what I'm going to do is go into my midtones, bring it down, gives a little S curve. As you can see, our image is now stretched out, which isn't a bad thing. That's good. We're adding contrast if your director wants that. So now we can go into our shadows and see, okay, this shot right here is kind of a misty black, and we can correct that in post, but also because the way I shot it, the sun was shining through and it was kind of giving a flare right here. So there's not a whole lot we can do in terms of changing the way that looks. That's something that was captured through the optics of the lens on set, or when I was filming this. So what we can do is I could just lower the shadows a bit. Then as I do that, we can look right here and see that I'm definitely crushing the shadows. See, the darker we go, the darker the scope gets. Now, in my opinion, this is way too dark. And I already know as I play this shot, it gets really dark because I pan over into the shadows. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to up the shadows. Maybe just add another here. Should I say it's still a little bit too flat in my taste. So I'll just go ahead and bring that down. Cool. So now we have something that's pretty properly exposed. But the thing is, in this shot, we have dramatic exposure changes. We go over here and it's light, and then we go over here and it's dark. So what you'd want to do is animate your grade if you were to go through the trouble of doing that. And then as we look at our RGB parade, we can see right here that we have our reds and our greens and our blues, and we can check each color individually so we can see which color is being accentuated more than other colors. So if we're looking at a white balance, we could see, okay, the blues here, for example, are going up to about 70 IRE, while our greens and our reds are peaking up at about 85 IRE. They're coming up. Our blues are coming up a little bit, but there's definitely way more red and green in the shot than blue. So if I was trying to color correct it, then I'd say, okay, in our highlights and our blues, let's add a little bit. And I'll bring up my blues. And I could do the same thing with my shadows. This is actually looking not bad, but I could see we have a little bit more blues and greens in our shadows than we do reds. So I could just move this a touch, get it perfect. And perfect. And that's essentially the basic way on how to read your scopes. Now what we have is our blacks aren't clipping, which is great because for broadcast work, you don't want your blacks to be clipping too hard and you don't want your whites to exceed over 100. So whenever I've done things for Fox or whoever I've done work for, I always make sure that once my edit is done, I add an adjustment layer and then I go into my curves, and then I just essentially bring it down just to make sure no whites in my shot ever exceed above 100 IRE, and I make it about 97 IRE. But as you can see, it's darker here. As it gets brighter, it's brighter, and then as we get more into the blues, our blues start to accentuate more over our other colors, which is essentially the way your scopes work. And a lot of colorists do like to just work by eye. They don't like to look at their scopes. They just like to look, by eye. Okay, this is the way I want it to look, and this is the way I want it to look. And then they'll go to their scopes and check it. But me personally, I like to work both ways. I like to make sure my whites are balanced, my midtones are balanced, my blacks are balanced, and also check my scopes at the same time. But creatively, I don't like to look at my scopes too much, because then it'll start to limit you. It'll start to bring in the math of it. It'll start to take out not necessarily the art form, but you'll start to think, okay, I have a little bit too much green. Now I need to subtract the green. Then I need to add some more magenta. Then it becomes a I need to as opposed to I want to. When I look at this shot right now, I can see, okay, I already know I want it to be a little bit warmer, so I could up the temperature. Maybe even go here to my highlights. Just make it a touch warmer. Bring this down. Bring that down. So you can see we still have a little bit of room to play with in our highlights. I could bring up our highlights. Even if that's a little bit too bright, no worries. I'll just go into my base correction, bring my whites down just a little bit. And now, in my opinion, that's a pretty beautiful looking shot. And then, of course, if you really wanted to go in, and a good example of the way you could use your vector scope is, see, we have a little bit of blue. Let me just go over to a shot where the blue is a little bit more. So we do have a little bit of blue / indigo going in the shot. So what I can do is go into my curves. I could take all the blue, take our hue versus saturation, and bring it in. So we take out all the blue in this shot, make it really desaturated. And as I did that, you'll notice there's no more blue. It's gone. So that's a good way on how to use your vector scope. And then if you have skin tones, if you want to pop out the skin tones, you just bring that out, which there are no skin tones. It's all just leaves, obviously. But then you can see how you're accentuating certain colors in your shot. Like the yellow, this is a very yellowy shot now. Just go into your vibrance. Obviously, it's way too much. Then it's all creative from here. So I hope this definitely taught you guys how to use your scopes. And I look forward to talking to you guys on the next portion where we go over how to grade inside DaVinci Resolve. Here we are, guys, DaVinci Resolve. I'm surprised you guys made it this far. This is a pretty long video as it is, and here you are trying to learn about DaVinci Resolve. Now, the first thing I'm going to say is, obviously, there are a ton of videos on YouTube. In fact, I'm going to use a fancy word for that. There's a plethora of YouTube videos covering DaVinci Resolve, but I'm going to try my best just to make it really short, simple, and sweet. I'm going to try and cover DaVinci Resolve in like under 6 or 7 minutes. Everything you need to know, just kidding, not everything you need to know, just the basics. So what we have here, well, the way that DaVinci Resolve works, it is made from a company called Blackmagic Design. I have DaVinci Resolve 12.5. Doesn't matter what version you have, I'm sure it's somewhat similar. We're not going to be going into the details to the point where it would really matter which version you have. Now, I'm operating on DaVinci Resolve 12.5. You're operating on whatever you're operating on, not that it matters. We're not going to be going too deep to the point where you would need to update it to run the version that I'm running. But did I mention that DaVinci Resolve is free? Yes, free. If you guys go on the Blackmagic Design website, you can download the light version for free. It just doesn't have you can't render things over 4K or up to 4K, and you can't, use noise reduction and stuff, all the little things. But if you need something for free, hell, guys, it's free. I mean, heck, even Sony Vegas, you still got to pay like $30 for Sony Vegas. This is free. So get on that. So I'm going to try and cover this within like 6 minutes. So what we have here are my clips. This is the media bin. So you could essentially go through, tell DaVinci which drives you're going to be using, and then you can go through. And it's just like any kind of media browser and any kind of NLE. NLE means non-linear editing software, in case you guys didn't know, or editor, sorry. And you could just go through, put whatever clips are going to be in your project in your bin, or you can import your project using, Final Cut Pro XML or EDL, or your DaVinci Resolve project file, which is, I think it's called .drp. Go ahead and import all that in there, and then you have all of your clips. You can go ahead and preview. You can see all the attributes. Like this is shot on the DJI Phantom 4, 4K, H.264. Perfect. So now that you have that, you could just go into your edit. I already have my cut done. By the way, if you guys want to see this video, link in the description. So little plug. So I have some aerial shots, 4K aerial shots. This looks really cool. And I already have it cut because DaVinci Resolve is not only a color grading software, it is made for editing too, which is pretty damn cool. So you can edit your entire thing here. And then once you have your cut done, you can go ahead and move to the next step. And that is color. And that's where DaVinci really shines. So I have this shot here, in my opinion, I think it's pretty cool. We have light rays going through and everything. And like I mentioned in the previous video, we have our scopes. We can definitely see we don't have any pure black spots here. So all of our blacks are on like 120. Now, the way I like to grade, well, the way DaVinci Resolve works, it is a node-based software. It doesn't use layers, although they aren't the same thing, but they kind of are the same thing when you think about them, when you start dealing with parallel nodes and connector nodes and things. But so this right here is our first node. And this is kind of like your base. Like this is, you're going to do your base color correction on, or any kind of color correction you need to do. And then if you need to add another node, you can either go to nodes and then add another serial node, or if you're a keyboard shortcuts kind of guy, just hit Alt-S for serial, Alt plus serial, like Captain Crunch, serial. Anyways, so we're just gonna go here, and then we can go to our lift, which is black. And if we look on our scopes, we could definitely crush the blacks just a touch. Bring that in, awesome. Go into our mids, let's say bring that in just a little bit. I'm trying to really show off these light rays that we got going on here. And I'll just go ahead and up these. Oh, we're clipping, just right there. Perfect. And then I'm just gonna go and make it warmer. And this isn't a color correction video on DaVinci. I'm just gonna show you, I'm just gonna do a quick grade so we have something to work off of. So this is our three-way color correction panel. I'm sure you guys have seen this, whether you work in Sony Vegas, Premiere Pro, or use any of the Red Giant. Anytime you guys have done any kind of color correction, I'm sure you guys are familiar with this. And then what we have here is the log version of that. So what log essentially means is it captures a smaller amount of colors within the area that you're selecting. I don't know if that makes any sense. It doesn't even make sense to me, but I'll try my best to explain it. So for example, when we deal with the lift, that is shadows. If we up the shadows, we're kind of upping our entire shot. So if you look at the scopes, when I up the shadows, we're upping the midtones as well, almost to the point of gray. And then when we crush the shadows, we're not only crushing the shadows, but we're also lowering the midtones. Everything besides the highlights is what we're affecting. But when we go into our log shadows, you'll see that we're only going to be affecting a smaller area of our clip. As you can see, now we're only affecting a much smaller area than when we rise it. We're not affecting the whole clip, just the shadows, which is really good when you need to go through and do some fine print, just fine adjustments, which is what that is. So what we have here are our curves. You can go here and you can do your S curve like we did in Premiere Pro. Just go ahead and add a little contrast. And then one of my favorite things to do is they have a whole bunch of different curves. They have hue versus saturation, hue versus luminance, luminance versus saturation, and saturation versus saturation. Now essentially what this is, oh, and of course hue versus hue. You can't forget that. Sorry, I left you out, hue versus hue. Now essentially what this means, hue versus saturation, is you can use the eyedropper tool and pick a certain hue. And hue, if you guys didn't know, is a certain color, like a blue or a green or a red. So you can pick that color, and then since it's versus saturation, you can now choose how much of that color you want in the shot, aka saturation. So for example, what we have here is a bit of a, actually let's try and we have a yellow. And so what I'm gonna go ahead and do is up it. So if you look, we just up the saturation value of the yellows in our shot, or I can desaturate it. So now what we're doing is desaturating the sky, but we still have a bit of orange going on back there. And then if we want, we could add more, or we can take it away. Now that is really awesome, because if you look in certain movies like Batman v Superman, there's a lot of skin tones that are really orange and, beautiful looking, but the background is really desaturated. A lot of directors are known for doing that. And this is one way on how you do it. You make sure your oranges or your flesh tones aren't really being affected, but then you desaturate all the other colors that would be in the background, such as blues and cyans and reds, etc., etc. So let's say if we want to go through here, pick this color, we can desaturate it. Let's get this, bring that in. And then that's the same thing for the hue versus luminance and the luminance versus saturation. So luminance versus saturation essentially means the darker the image versus the lighter part of the image. So if you want it to be, let's say the darker parts of the image are desaturated and then the lighter parts of the image are saturated, you could essentially bring that down So now all the darker parts of the image are desaturated, but we still have color coming from the lighter parts of the image, which is right dead in the center. Then we could bring that up, and now that is way too overly saturated. Or we can flip it and have the sun rays be desaturated, but have all the floor and the desert be saturated, which looks kind of funky, but you know, it works. And then if you really want to, you can go through and let's say add a power window or even a vignette. So we can go through, double click on this, extend it out. And then the way to add a vignette is I will invert it. And then I will just go to the midtones, darken it, and soften it out, make it bigger. And so essentially what we just did was we just added a vignette. So if we solo it, we can see our matte, we can see the area that we're affecting. Then you can look on our scope and see, okay, it's darker, lighter, darker, which is exactly what we're going for. And then if we want, we can even make it darker. But that is essentially the way it works. And then the final tab is your delivery tab. So once you click delivery, DaVinci Resolve specializes in encoding your final project, which is really nice. The footage looks great with their debayer engine. So the way you can go in is you can either render out your entire project as one giant clip, whether it's H.264 or DNxHD, DNxHR, or ProRes, whatever codec you want to do. It supports most of them, if not all of them, or Cineform. And you could just go through and render out your entire project, or you can go in and let's say you want to render out one specific clip. You can go here, hit render this clip, and it'll create an in and out point for that specific clip, and then it'll just render that clip. And another thing you can do is, let's say if you want to render out your entire project, let's say we want this to be our in point, and then let's say this shot is our out point. So let's say we want to render out this entire project, and we could render it out as individual clips that have the same source name as they had when they were coming into the project. So you're essentially round tripping. So we can now export them and then relink them back in Premiere Pro if that's the kind of workflow you're working with. But there's so many endless possibilities you could use DaVinci Resolve for, especially encoding alone. It's just really great. So just a quick recap, you import all your footage into the media browser. Then you can go into the edit tab and actually edit your entire clip. I'm actually working with the director right now who edited his entire feature film completely within Resolve, and then he's handing me the project. Then all I have to do is go into the color tab. It's definitely much more work than it seems, considering it's a 2-hour film, but then I color grade the entire film. And then since I'm handling the conform, I would go into the deliver tab and render it completely out. You know, it's putting it on DVD and Blu-ray, so then I'll do the 1080p render, then the 720 by 480 render, and then I'll just add it to the queue, start render, then my job would be done. So DaVinci Resolve, that is how you use it. There's many more tutorials out there that go much more in depth, but I just wanted to quickly touch on the software and how great it is and how efficient you can work with it. So thank you guys so much for watching, and next we will go over how you can color in Adobe SpeedGrade. So stay tuned and stay awesome. All right, here we are, guys. Welcome to the 3-way color correction portion of this tutorial. So this is basically a crash course on what you need to know to get started on color correction. We're going to go over what exactly is hue, what exactly is saturation and luminance, your shadows, midtones, and highlights, contrast, and how that all plays into each other. Basically, the basics, and I've said basically so much. So really quickly, we have a shot here. This is an actor named Kyle. So what we have is a standard shot on the Blackmagic Cinema camera. It's very flat. We have a fill light hitting him here. We have a rim light, kind of a key hitting him here. It's like a Mole Richardson, like 1K light. You know, it's a very, very flat shot. He's slightly underexposed, but it's nothing that we can't fix. So when we look at this shot, the first thing that we can see is that there's not a whole lot of color and there's not a whole lot going on. He's very flat and kind of gray looking. That's because there's no saturation and no contrast. So saturation essentially means how much of a color is going to pop in a shot. It doesn't necessarily mean you're adding in new colors. It just means that you're adding in the colors that are already there. So if we move up our saturation slider, it's just going to take the colors that are there and it's just going to make them pop more. It's going to accentuate certain colors. Now, contrast is essentially lowering the black point and raising the white point. So you get more of a sharper, cleaner look to your image. So if we look on our scopes, when we up the contrast, it's going to go down and then it's going to go up. So we can add contrast and boom, way too much. But contrast is just lowering the black point, upping the white point, and then everything in between goes up and down. It just kind of separates your image a little bit better. I used to think hue was a special word. I thought saturation was red, green, and blue, and hue was like yellow, cyan, and magenta. Like they're just fancy ways of saying, whatever. But it turns out hue is just color. That hue is just a fancy word for saying color. So for example, this is a blue hue. This is a red hue. This is a green hue. So hue is just what the color is. Saturation means how much of that color is going to be in your shot. So it all plays into each other in some kind of way. So for example, if we add saturation here, just so we can get a little color in this shot, I can add blue hue into, the midtones. But it's like, okay, that's a good amount of blue. We can add more blue, or we can take away blue to the point where it's black and white. So that is how that plays into each other. Saturation is how much of that hue is going to be in your shot. Now, again, it's diminishing returns. You add and then you take out. You're going to add certain colors, like I want it to be a little warmer, then I want it to be a little cooler. So you're always pushing and pulling, adding, taking away. For example, you can, with your temperature, you can add a little bit of warmth, make it warmer, but then you realize, okay, that's a little too green for my taste. So the opposite of green, is magenta. So you can add magenta, or you could take away magenta and make it a little greener. It is always pushing and pulling. Now, with your shadows, we have our shadows, midtones, and highlights. So this is pretty intuitive. Your shadows are the darker parts of your image. Your midtones are the midpoints of your image, typically the skin tones. If you exposed it correctly, if you had a light meter, had false color on set, and it was exposed correctly, your midtones are generally your skin tones and your highlights. But I mean, that's a bit rudimentary. The shadows can be your midtones in some cases, depending on how your DP wanted to expose the shot. For example, if they're in a car or something, then their skin might be in the shadows. So you always have to be careful on where your skin tones lie. For example, I can see right here on my waveform that his skin tones are right here, right in this area is where his skin tones are. And then where it gets brighter, I can see that it gets brighter right here. In fact, we're even clipping a little bit. And so that is how that all goes into play. So for example, I can go on ahead and lower my shadows. I can go into my highlights and up them. And then all these little wheels here are the hue and saturation value of each portion of your image. So I can add blue into the highlights, or I can add red into the midtones, which is essentially what that is. And then you can lower the gamma or up the gamma. And it all plays into each other. For example, when you add contrast to your shot, you are adding saturation. So you're always pushing and pulling. When you add contrast, you typically might want to take away a little bit of saturation. Or if you are taking away contrast, making it flat, then you need to add saturation. There's always a push-pull effect going on. And I hope that made it a little bit easier to understand what exactly this all means. In a nutshell, you have your shadows, midtones, and highlights, darker parts, mid parts, bright parts of your image. And within that, you can control what you want the color to be. For example, if you want your shadows to be a little desaturated, you can lower the saturation in your shadows. And it's just always pushing and pulling. And then once you get this down, once you understand the basics of color correction, then you can go through and create a secondary, maybe, pull a quick key out the skin tones, do that, blur it out, do something really quick. And the next thing you know, we can make him look blue, because that is the magic of color correction. Anyways, I hope this taught you guys something. I look forward to talking to you guys in the next section. Hello everyone, welcome to the final section of this color grading tutorial. I hope you guys have been following along, enjoying it, and learning a ton. So in this section, we're just going to be doing a post-apocalyptic grade just to wrap up the video. That's one of my favorite grades to do. And I'm going to be doing it completely within Adobe After Effects. So what we have here are some raw DNG files. I'm just going to go ahead and import those, make sure the camera raw sequence is set. And then I'm just going to go on ahead and lower the exposure just a little bit. This shot already looks about how I want it to. Since it was shot raw, I can adjust the white balance, make it just a touch warmer. Then I'm just going to go ahead and hit OK. Then we're going to import that. The next thing I'm going to do is right click and hit interpret my footage. Since this is an image sequence, I'm just going to go ahead and make that 24. Drop that into a new composition. It's already 16 bits because this is 12-bit raw from the Blackmagic Cinema camera. So we have 12 bits of latitude that we can, mess with. So right here we just have a shot, it's his feet, and then it pans up to his head. And I particularly like this because, you know, it was gloomy, the sun was setting, we have this not overcast, we have this really gloomy look, him looking out to the horizon, you know, we have broken down cars, all the kind of cool stuff. But I want to do something that's really Book of Eli post-apocalyptic looking, and not necessarily a cool zombie post-apocalyptic, but more of a desert grungy. This guy is in the middle of a desert and he's not liking himself at the moment. And I'm going to do this completely within After Effects with no plugin. So the first thing I like to do is add curves. Go ahead and add curves. The next thing I like to add is hue and saturation. Then the next thing I add is levels, not auto levels. We don't do automatic here. Who do you think we are? Then we're going to go ahead and add color balance. And then we're going to go on ahead and add tint. And that'll be the end of it. Now this may seem like a lot, but these are all powerful color correction tools to have in your arsenal. So basically, just to run down through the curves, as we know, this is the all-around go-getter for color correction, which we discussed earlier. You can add some highlights, add some shadows. You already have some contrast. Then we have our hue and saturation. We already know what that does. Levels, you can make your midtones brighter, darker. And then we have our color balance, and then we have our tint. Now, the first thing I'm going to do in this shot is I want it to be really warm and gray and desaturated. So I'm just going to go ahead and bring the darks and the blacks, just crush that in a little bit. Maybe just bring up our highlights, kind of get that gloominess covering them. Bring that in. That looks pretty cool, but it's a little too, I see a little bit of blue in there. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is go into the blue, just maybe take out any blues. Not that way. Just go ahead and click down here, take out any blues that we can have right about there. Perfect. And that's just about all I need to use the curves for. I already have my general contrast point and how I want the shot to look. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is go down to the hue and saturation and bring the overall master saturation down about here. But I'm not going to bring it all the way down because I'm going to go into the individual channels. I don't want there to be any blue in this shot. 0. Take out the blues. No cyans. We don't want any cyans. We don't want any greens. Well, greens just a little bit. It's post-apocalyptic, guys. There's no green. There's no happiness here. Magentas, none of that. And the yellows, we can have a little bit of yellows. So you can see we have a good amount of yellows in this shot. So I'll probably I'm going to bring that in, not too much. I'll probably darken it. Just like that. And then our reds are where most of this shot lies. See, all of that is red. So I'll probably keep that with a bit of saturation because we want there to be some color, but I'll darken it. Cool. And I think that's actually looking pretty cool. Like this already, in my opinion, looks pretty cool, but it could still use some work. So next thing I'm going to do is go into the levels. I'm going to get my blacks and white points where I want it, which I already did with the curves, but this will just fine tune it. Let's see. Just go into our gamma, bring that in. I don't mind if his backpack is clipping because this is a really dark shot. We don't need to see all the detail in there. When I say clipping, I mean crushing. There's a difference. And I'm about happy with that look. So now I'm going to go in. I already know I want the sky just to be a touch warmer. So I'm just going to bring in the highlight blue, make it a little warmer. Go into the shadow blue. Let's see if we can take some or add. Let's actually add just a little bit of blue. Go into the mid-tone blue. Take that away. Now we're making it a little bit warmer. We're taking away all the blues. We're not necessarily adding warm colors. We're taking away colors. So I'm not going to go in and add red, oh yeah, we want it to be warm. That's like not exactly what you want to do at times. A lot of times when you take away colors, you get a certain color. For example, if you guys have seen Lord of the Rings, if you ever watched the behind the scenes on how they colored the film, they're saying in the Shire, they don't want it to just be green and they don't want it to just be gold, and they didn't just grade it to be gold. They actually extracted colors and they took away colors, which gave them that gold fantasy Shire look that we're all used to seeing because they took away colors as opposed to adding colors, which is extremely important, at least for me. I always kind of took that into consideration. And then the tint is kind of the final little touch, just to desaturate it. And in my opinion, that looks really nice. And something that I always like to do is add a vignette. So I'm going to hit Control Y, make composition size, make an elliptical mask, subtract it, feather it. I'm just zooming through this. I'm assuming you guys already know how to kind of do the basics of After Effects. Just a little bit. And the last thing I'll do is go ahead and add an adjustment layer, and then I'm going to go in here and type in Lumetri color. And what I'm going to go ahead and do here is one thing that I just love doing is upping the temperature. So the temperature is kind of, it mixes all of your values just to get a warmer temperature or a cooler temperature. So you don't have to go into the highlights, midtones, and shadows and try and get that warm look. It'll do it for you with your temperature slider. So I'm just going to move that up, and just like that, I'm already getting the look that I want. And what I typically do when it comes to this film is I desaturate the image and then I warm it up, or I warm it up and then desaturate it. Because when you add orangish yellows and then you desaturate it, it kind of gives you a brown look. And so we have darkness and is looking pretty good. And then of course, if we really wanted to make it cinematic, aka Zack Snydery, we can go on ahead and add some particles. You know, I have this particle pack here. I don't know if you guys can really see it too well, but there's a lot of floating particles. And then you could just hit mode, go to add, you know, do your thing, put them in the shot, add, you know, camera lens blur, motion blur, track it into the shot, maybe roto him out so they're going in front of him, all that fun stuff. That's the kind of stuff that I did in the final in the final short film. For the sake of the tutorial, I'm not going to do that here. And of course, you can always go in and add a little bit of noise. And one other thing that I do like to do is add a little bit of a glow overhead. So I'm just going to go ahead and go here, add an adjustment layer, not a solid, an adjustment layer, Control-Alt-Y on PC for keyboard shortcuts. Always know your keyboard shortcuts because that is extremely important. I'm just going to type in glow, and that is way too much. So I'm just going to move this over, bring out the glow radius, bring this over just a little bit, bring that over, and cool. Now I'm just going to go ahead and get my masking tool. I just kind of want to get this much of the shot. And of course, you definitely want to track this in there and everything. You know, take care of your shot, track it, do what you need to do. Go here. Let's maybe do a hard light. Not a hard light. Let's maybe do soft light. There we go. And then let's feather it because we need a feather. Hide that mask. Before, after. Before, after. If you notice around his head here, it kind of gives a light wrap around, or wrap, fall off, I guess I could say. You know, this is actually one of those occasions I think leaving it alone would look better. That's just my opinion. But anyways, I hope you guys learned something from this. That's how I do a post-apocalyptic grade. And of course, you could always go in and animate it. For example, something that I did is I had it desaturated when we were by his feet, which you could actually do right here. So for example, I wanted it to be more colorful right about here. So then I'd hit my keyframe and then I'll move over. Wait for the camera to start moving up. And I'll just move this down because I wanted this shot to be really desaturated as his feet. And then as the camera starts tilting up, it starts to gain a little bit more saturation. It's really subtle, but when you animate your grades, it just adds that much more production value, makes it look that much more professional, which at the end of the day, when your work is more professional, you make more money, you're happier, everybody's happy, we all like good work, and that is why you're watching this tutorial in the first place. That was a lot to say, but anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Thank you guys so much for watching this tutorial. I hope you guys learned a lot because I know I definitely learned a lot making it. Please feel free to follow me on social media. All that information is in the description below. And once again, if you guys want to subscribe to my YouTube channel, I do post a lot of short films, tutorials, and informational videos on color correction. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.